Have you ever had a moment when a Sims build becomes more than just pixels on a screen? When the process feels less like decorating and more like sorting through your own thoughts? This one surprised me. It began with ghosts and local legends, but ended up teaching me something I didn't expect. Today we're building St. Mary's, or at least my Sims version of it. It's based very loosely on the real church in Bungay, England, which is a place wrapped up in stories about a mysterious black dog that's been a part of local folklore for centuries. Legend says this spectral hound, known as Black Shuck, would sometimes appear on stormy nights, its eyes glowing like embers, leaving villagers awestruck and more than a little spooked. I started this build with all those eerie details in mind, but the more I built, the more it became something else. A space for remembrance and reflection and maybe even hope. Now, I promise I did not set out to build something this heartfelt. I was honestly thinking spooky folklore, moody lighting, a dramatic thunderstorm or two, perfect Halloween vibes. But somewhere between the stone arches and the flickering candles, this build decided for itself that it wanted to be beautiful instead of bleak. Honestly, who knew that a bunch of Sims in a digital church could turn into a tiny celebration of life, full of surprises and chaos and just a touch of magic? Isn't it so funny how The Sims can be that place for some of us? All the chaos in the game helping us make meaning out of the chaos in real life. Maybe you can relate, but if you don't, no worries at all. This build is perfect for practical gameplay as well. And keep your eyes peeled, because even though we didn't go full on Black Shuck legend with this build in the end, I still put a subtle nod to Black Shuck somewhere in this build. And I can't wait to reveal how our spectral black dog makes a little cameo later on. If you don't want this channel to be gone and forgotten, you could consider giving a toast, lighting a candle, or if it's easier, you could just hit the like and subscribe button so our little corner of Sims life here isn't lost to the ages. So, the build. As I mentioned, this is based loosely on St. Mary's Church in Bungay, which is in Suffolk in England. St. Mary's was originally part of a Benedictine priory in the 1100s, and it was later rebuilt in the 14th century in what is called the perpendicular Gothic style. That means strong vertical lines, soaring windows, and stone that seems determined to reach heaven itself. And honestly, I have always been so fascinated by the drama of Gothic architecture. Those pointed arches, the shadowy corners, the way the light dances through the glass. Let me know if you could design a space inspired by the perpendicular Gothic style. What would you create? I would love to hear your ideas. Today, we are building in the world of Ravenwood, which came with the Life and Death pack, and it's the first time that I've built in this world on this channel, Sims Builds and Chill, so it's quite a special one. And I chose it because we have these stunning views and these really gorgeous ruins. A lot of old churches in the UK might be surrounded by ruins like this, or maybe part of the building itself might have fallen into ruin at some point in the past, so it felt very authentic. It felt like our building would look settled and right here. I leaned very heavily on pieces from the Life and Death expansion, the Vampire game pack, and the Castle Estate kit, with a little sprinkling of other packs and kits here and there. But the items from these particular packs really helped me capture the vertical grandeur of perpendicular Gothic, while still, I hope, keeping the space cozy as well. And just to incorporate it that little bit more, the stones we chose for the outside of the church, they're also from the Life and Death pack, as well as the front door. And these gorgeous windows, they're from Castle Estate, and they really gave us the grandeur and the majesty that this building needs. I tried to make this look as traditional as possible. A lot of old churches in the UK are shaped this way, shaped like a cross for both symbolic and practical reasons. So I tried to incorporate that into this build to make it as realistic and as authentic as I possibly could. I ended up sinking the nave of the church down just a little. I have lived in America for quite a while now, so it's been a while since I've been in an English church. but in my memory, they're always sunken down a little. It feels like you go down to get to the nave, and I love this idea because I think it makes these tall walls feel even bigger and even more majestic and grand. So I did that here as well, and then I used these lovely benches from Get Together as the pews, and I think they're really beautiful, and the shapes kind of mirror the shape of the windows we've got here. The way they end in this beautiful point. I do shuffle these around a lot during this build to get the most effective layout, but as soon as I placed them down, I knew that these were the ones that we needed in this build. As I'm building here, I kept thinking about how spaces like this in real life can feel both majestic and comforting at the same time. I don't know if you've ever stepped into a space, real or in The Sims, that just made you pause for a moment. It's fascinating how some might find these spaces mysterious, while others find them peaceful, and some perhaps find them a little spooky. There's something so fascinating about how a single space can evoke so many different emotions from different people, and sometimes, yes, absolutely, evoke all those feelings within us at once. It feels a little strange to say, but building a church like this has been surprisingly comforting to me at the moment. I don't know about you, but as a child, I used to find churches and graveyards so spooky. And honestly, I still do. But somehow creating this particular space in The Sims turned that fear into something quieter and more gentle, and a space in time to reflect and remember. I don't know if you've ever visited a space that used to feel scary but now feels comforting, or maybe different emotions as well. Maybe there was somewhere in the past that used to feel super fun but now just bores you to death. I'd love to hear what spaces have surprised you as well. So, as I was hinting at earlier, I started this build thinking it would be dark and haunted, inspired by the Black Shuck legend. But sometimes, my friends, life quietly steps in and changes what we need. And that's what happened to me during this build. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too sad or heavy, but just to share with you so that this makes sense, the past week has been quite hard. We had a family member pass away, and it was someone who was very important in my life and someone who meant a lot to a lot of people. And I think some of those feelings, some of those emotions found their way into this build, not in a scary way, but instead the build almost softened and it became gentler and it became more beautiful as well, I think, as a result of everything that was going on in my own life whilst I was building this. And there was something quite cathartic about it. It became a place to remember and celebrate life, both in The Sims and in my own real life world as well. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, but in the process of creating this build, I discovered something unexpected, a quiet comfort in the act of building itself. Taking a little time to build something gave me a moment for all those memories to come back. I think for a lot of us, The Sims can be that place to pause and reflect and be creative, step outside the chaos of our own world for a little while and pour everything that's been going on into the screen. So as we wander through St. Mary's together today, keep your eyes open. You might spot little nods and little surprises that remind us how life and Sims life can be full of magic, even in the midst of sorrow. So here's a question for you, everyone. If you could rebuild a place from your past in The Sims, what would you include first? I grew up in England, as some of you may know if you've watched my channel before, but now I live in America. So building this little digital church felt like a nice way to return home for a while. Even in The Sims, I could wander through the arches and the graveyard and feel a bit of that familiar charm and history. Even if you've never left your hometown, maybe you know that feeling when a place, even if it's a virtual one in The Sims, can feel a little bit like home. All of these little pieces we have up here, these are all from the Life and Death pack. If you hold a funeral here, you could actually put a picture of your deceased Sim in this little photo frame at the front. That would be a nice little personal touch. And then your Sims can give eulogies at this podium here as well. For the lower area, the nave, I used this lovely stone, which is from City Living. And then by the front door, I used a different type of stone, which is from Vampires. I thought they complemented each other quite well and added a little bit of visual interest as well. But I was thinking, how cool would it be to imagine mention that these are the original stones from when the church was first built and they've been preserved for all these years. There's a really nice sense of history to that, I thought. And then on some of the platforms, I used a base game wood, and I thought maybe we could pretend in our minds that this had to have been replaced a few times over the centuries. So it's old, but it's a newer addition to the church. And I think that's very realistic. A lot of churches have had to have been revamped and renovated over the centuries to maintain the upkeep and to preserve their history. So that was the story I was trying to tell with these different flooring elements. And then down the middle, down this central aisle, we have a base game red carpet. And this lovely red color dictated the color scheme for a lot of the interior of this church as we go through. At this point, I'd like to apologize if you were feeling a little bit dizzy. I know the camera's moving around a lot. It took me quite a few goes to get all the spandrels right, to get them to all connect in a way that made sense. So I hope no one out there is getting motion sick. Hopefully we calm down a bit with the camera angles in just a moment. These gorgeous columns are also from the Castle Estate kit, and I use them quite a lot throughout this build. And perhaps the most successful moment for these is how we have them lining the aisle. It creates a lovely focal point for our build, and I think it would also help create a special moment of reverence for anyone walking down this aisle. For the lighting, I added a lot of different candles. Of course, a lot of modern churches do have electricity, and we do have some electrical elements in here, but I thought they added a really nice ambience and a glow, so that's what I went with for most of the lighting in this build. Not all, but most. I placed some of them up here behind our Sims picture. They really do create this really nice atmosphere. And then one of the funeral activities that our Sims can do is to light a candle in memory of our departed Sims. So I put lots of candles by the door to suggest that as our Sims were coming in, they were each lighting a candle in memory of our Sim who had passed. I thought it might be nice to have a special area where our Sims could do this. And then these lovely red flowers. These are from Growing Together. I end up using these not so sparingly around the church. They were the perfect color. They were the perfect vibes. I put them down beside each row of pews to give a sense of formality and occasion. And then a little bit later, I do come back and I add a candle to each of these flower displays that are down the center aisle, which I know might seem a little bit dangerous to have fire down by our Sims' feet, but I thought maybe we could pretend that these are battery powered candles, so it's not a concern. It's just a nice way to light our Sims' way as they walk down the aisle and find their seats. I also put the flowers down by the coffin and up on the altar as well, and it became a really lovely way to just tie everything together. And then one moment that I was very proud of was I used these tapestries, which are from the Vampires pack. And with the Move Objects cheat on, which if you want to do this too, it's bb.moveobjects space on. I then used the 9 key to raise them up as high as I could and place them in between these Castle Estate columns to make it look like they were secured to them and they were hanging from them. And then I ended up choosing them in 3 different swatches in the end, and they create a lovely sense of color and joy and vibrancy in this space. And then I was thinking to myself, one important choice for a funeral is music. So we have this very grand organ from the Vampires pack. Of course, we had to have that for a church. But then I was thinking maybe our Sims would also like to play songs that were important to their dearly departed. So I put a few speakers around on the walls. I end up putting them up on the 2nd floor so that they didn't look distracting or take away from the historical vibe that we're going for. And then I also put down this little stereo on this desk over here. I thought maybe we could pretend that this was kind of like the sound box, the electronic hub of the building, where someone who helps run the funerals might sit and they might play the music at the correct time, or just help keep everything flowing, maybe do administrative tasks. So I thought a desk might be something that would actually be included in real life. It just seemed to be a very practical, sensible touch. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the channel before, but I used to work in theatres and I was kind of channeling a bit of that theatre energy here, a place where all those technical things can happen. So we put it over here, we put down the sound system so that we can play music. Maybe if our departed sim was into alternative or maybe patio music or holiday music, whatever they're into, we could play that during the funeral as a nice little personal nod to our sim. I put down a computer as well, as I was saying, as a place where whoever's running the building would do administrative tasks or organizational tasks. And then I just sectioned it off with a little half wall. I end up coming back and putting a curtain here as well to just keep it really private so it's not distracting during the funeral. I did place down this banquet table, which is from high school years. I don't know if there would necessarily be something like this, but I thought just practically for gameplay, it might be nice to have a place where our Sims can grab refreshments. And also I needed a purpose for the second arm as well, so I thought this might be a really good spot for something like this. Also in this space, I put down this lovely trinket shelf, which is from Life and Death, and I put down some books on it. That seemed like something that might be quite authentic. Maybe there's books about the history of the church or the history of the local area, that kind of thing. And then as well, just a little chair. I thought maybe there might be someone who, maybe a volunteer, something like that, someone who was managing the refreshments area who might need to replenish them if they ran out or something like that. Or someone who might be able to answer any questions that the visitors had. I thought that might be quite a good area for this. Or of course, if our Sims are just visiting the church and there's not a funeral happening at that point, maybe it might be nice to have a spot here next to the bookshelf where they can sit and read. This was a moment I was so excited to show you. When we change to nighttime and all of the candles come up, doesn't it just take on a whole new energy at night? Here I'm just making sure that everything's well lit and everything looks beautiful at all times of the day and night. So whenever you decide to visit with your Sims, it will still have that very special ambiance. This might also seem like quite a strange thing to do. As I say, it's been a while since I've been inside a church. But in my memory, they always have memorials or graves within the wall, very old ones that might be designated to people who were important to the community or to the church. So I tried to mimic that memory here by putting the gravestones in the wall. And to be honest, it just added a little bit more interest and a little bit more history and mystery. History and mystery. But maybe it contributes to the story of this building and how old it is and how we can imagine all the Sims who have come here in the past. Here you can see I'm working on the steeple. I did have an idea that it might be cool if we could somehow get stairs to run up the entire part of the building so that our Sims could go to the top and so that they could look out at this amazing view. I have a very early memory of doing this in my local church. When I was a child, going to the top of the tower and looking out and looking down and being in awe of how high up I was. I have never been the kind of person to be afraid of heights or anything like this, so I really loved this and I thought this might be a good opportunity, but unfortunately, unless I was going to do it with a ladder, the stairs just took up too much space in this little church. So the tower is going to actually be a very practical place where we are going to put our bathrooms. I scratched these marks onto the door to give a little nod to the original inspiration for this build, the legend of Black Shuck. On a stormy day in 1577, locals say a massive black dog, its eyes glowing like embers, burst through the door of St. Mary's in Bungay with a clap of thunder. It ran up the nave, bringing chaos around it, and some even say it caused the steeple to collapse before it disappeared towards the neighbouring Blythburgh church. The scorches left behind, called the Devil's Fingerprints, can still be seen on Blythburgh's door today. In our Sims church, I've popped a little nod to these marks here, a subtle reminder of the legend of Black Shuck. So keep your eyes open because you never know where Black Shuck might be hiding. I wanted to create a rather grand entranceway to the lot itself, not just to the church, but to the actual surrounding areas, the graveyard and the cemetery. So I made my own here to make sure it looked really in keeping with the body of the building. And this is where our Sims are going to formally enter. Again, this is something that I think you would find at most churches in England. There's something a little bit spooky, but also quietly magical about Old English churchyards. I know many people who just like to go and sit in them. And absorb the atmosphere. Not that that's something I personally usually do, but I do understand the feeling that they get in these places. It's almost like a space where the world gets to pause for a moment and we can just reflect on life and everything that goes with it. For me personally, what I love about them is how these spaces tell stories, not through grand sermons or gestures that we might get inside, but through the weathered leaning stones and the way the ivy wraps itself around everything and all the names carved into the stone. Sometimes it just hits you that each one belonged to someone who walked the same paths and listened to the same sounds, and maybe if we're in the UK, complained about the same unpredictable weather. And maybe that's the charm of these old grounds. So I tried to capture that as much as I could. Almost all of the landscaping pieces I chose for the outside are from Life and Death. Many of them are from the debug menu. There are some really nice pieces in the Life and Death debug. I always forget about that. If you want to search for these too, you can type bb.show hidden objects, enter, and then separately bb.show live edit objects, enter into the cheat bar at the top to unlock the debug menu. And then what I did is I filtered just by the Life and Death pack so I could really target the Life and Death vibes. I made the spire as tall as I possibly could and then added on top of it these pointy roofs as well, just to give it that extra height and a nod to the perpendicular Gothic style. We're also going to get a few Life and Death roof pieces on here eventually as well, which make them even taller. I noticed from looking at pictures that a lot of church spires will have some kind of structure at the bottom, something that I imagine was there to help support the tower and help give it that height. So I tried to mimic that here with these little square walls and a few roof pieces as well. As I say, I was trying to be as authentic as possible while still making it look good in The Sims. Sometimes when you're trying to do a replica, it can be hard to get that balance right, don't you think? Sometimes what looks good in real life isn't necessarily going to look good in the game. But here, after I played around with it for a little while, I was quite happy with what we were able to come up with. Let me know what you think about it. Do you like it, or do you think it would have been more effective to have left the tower as a plain square? As I placed the graves, I tried to tell little stories with them. Some of them are carefully tended, and I decorated them with flowers and stuffed animals and tiny ornaments, things like that, reminders of Sims who were deeply loved and remembered, while others have been left to time, hidden under creeping greenery, as if no one has visited for a while. And together, I hope that they would create this nice rhythm between memory and the passage of time. And it made a few memories stir for me. Memories from when I was a child and looking at some of the old stones. Sometimes the names, you could hardly make them out anymore, and just wondering who that person was and what kind of life they led. And in building this space, I discovered something quite unexpected. Even in a digital church in the world of this game with its tiny Sims and its pixelated stories, can become a very real celebration of life in all its messy and delightful glory. Maybe that's the true magic of The Sims, where memory and imagination and everyday moments play together in a way that feels surprisingly real. And in that vein, some of the landscaping I allowed to get very overgrown as well, particularly in the back of the church, where nature and time have been allowed to do their thing a little bit. I hid a few statues back here and a few other little things that our Sims could find if they dared to look. When I was working on the landscaping, I wanted it to feel beautiful, but not too tidy. I wanted that kind of beauty that feels a little wild around the edges, like nature's been quietly reclaiming the space. Old churchyards in England often have that. The grass grows unevenly and wildflowers sneak in between the stones and ivy drapes itself wherever it pleases. It's not neglected, it's just content to be imperfect, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the things that can be both scary and comforting, because while it can create these dark, shadowy corners, there's also something healing about spaces that don't need to be completely controlled, where a little overgrowth feels like a sign of life continuing rather than decay. And it reminded me that even in stillness, the world keeps growing gently and quietly. And I think there's a real charm that comes from that mix of human care and natural freedom. So I am just going to finish up here, my friends. If you've made it this far, I'd just like to say thank you for joining me on this journey. I know it's been a bit of a different one this week, but I hope you've enjoyed it and got something from it. And if you'd like to play here too, I'm going to put it on the gallery. I'm going to call it Traditional English Church. And you can also find all of my creations by searching for the hashtag SimsBuildsChill. If you'd like to watch another build, you might also enjoy this fairy werewolf cottage, a place for an unexpected love story.